I'm sure you've been wondering where I've been, and let's just say I took a little sabbatical from making YouTube videos for a while. You know, life gets in the way. But anyways, I'm back. I've been having such a horrible reading slump this year, so this is going to be kind of like my mid-year check-in. I'm starting to get back into it, but so far I've only read 8 books this year. Yeah, shocking. I know. But you know, we persevere, we move on, and we continue our hobbies, even though we stopped for a little bit. So the books that I've been reading this year, not so great, but it's getting better. So let me just get right into it with the first book that I read this year, which was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, and is about these 40 women who are trapped in a bunker. They have no idea how they got there. They don't remember much of their lives outside. They don't know how long they've been there. They can't, you know, see the sun or the moon, or like they're just trapped in there, and the guards are all male. And the book is set from the perspective of the one child character. So she was basically not born there, but she's lived her whole life there. So she doesn't remember a life outside of the bunkers. So everything she knows about the world has been taught or passed down to her by these other women who are there. When all of a sudden, a guard kind of dies and they're able to get out. So it's kind of their story of like maneuvering this new dystopian world. Interesting book, but I personally didn't really vibe with it. I gave it a 3 stars. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it was the timing that I read it. I thought it would be more exciting, and it wasn't. So there's that. The next book I read was not any better. I gave it a 2 stars, and it was Graceling by Kristin Cashore. I wanted to read this because another YouTuber, I think her name is Erin, recommended it to get out of a reading slump, but I feel like it didn't really help me get out of a reading slump. I gave it 2.5 stars, to be fair. So like right in the middle. It's about these people who have graces, and graces are essentially like magic powers. What magic power do you have? And our main character, Katsa, has the magical ability to kill people. So she's basically hired as an assassin by the king, and the story goes on from the story starts off with her kind of saving this man as part of her. She was told to kill this man, but she was like, you know what, today I don't feel like doing what I'm told. I'm going to let him go. Technically, it could have been a really, really great book, but I just did not like how it was written. So I'm just gonna read my review, okay? I said, this book really confused me in terms of its writing. While I can admit the plot was interesting, there wasn't much rationale for most of the events that happened. There was no world building to help us understand why some people were graced and others weren't. There were also several plot holes. Towards the end, things felt very rushed and unfinished. And because of the writing, I never actually thought about the book when I was idle, which is essentially true because 6 months later, I don't remember what the hell I read. The next book I read, finally, we moved on to our first 5 stars of 2025, which was Fundamentally by Nusayba Yunus. And maybe some of you guys have heard of this book because if I'm not mistaken, it was nominated for the Women's Prize. I'm not sure if it won. I think it did, or it was a finalist. But anyways, I read it in like a day or 2 days. I loved it. Okay, the main character is this Iraqi Pakistani woman, I think from the UK or from the US, but essentially she wrote her PhD thesis on re-educating or rehabilitizing ISIS brides. And because she wrote her thesis on this, she was essentially hired by the UN to go to Iraq, go to these refugee camps or these camps with ISIS brides and rehabilitate them. So, obviously there's a sense of imposter syndrome there because she's like, oh my God, I have no idea how to actually treat these women. I just wrote my dissertation on this. I didn't actually think it would land me a job like this. So it was really interesting because the book tells you a lot about like the inner workings of the UN and how a lot of people there are just like Nepo babies who don't necessarily want to get shit done. Loved the writing. It was so humorous. There were a lot of really good like chapters, really good passages in there. And this is her first novel, so I'm really surprised that she managed to really hit the ball out of the park. Next, I read Sociopath by, I think her name is Patricia Gange. So this one is a memoir, and it's about this psychologist, Patricia, who tells the story of her life from a young age to where she is now. And essentially, Patricia has sociopathy. And it's very interesting because throughout the whole book, she's kind of learning how to live life with her sociopathy. And then in school, she moved on to do like a bachelor's in psychology to learn more about herself. And then she found out that, hey, we don't actually understand pretty much anything about sociopathy. So she decided to, dedicate more of her time to that. She ended up doing like a PhD in that and ended up becoming like a clinician. Essentially, throughout the whole book, the main theme was that sociopaths aren't all killers, is what she was trying to say. A lot of what we know about sociopathy is misunderstood, misguided. A lot of research studies done on sociopathy is done within the prison system. So obviously you're only researching one demographic of people. Whereas what about the sociopaths who aren't caught or who don't do violent crime? What about them? And essentially she says in her book that sociopathy, or people who are diagnosed with sociopathy, what they lack essentially is empathy, or they live a lot of their lives with apathy. And in order to feel something, they will then do these things that are considered like violent or amoral, like even simple things like breaking into somebody's house or stealing somebody's wallet, even things like that, to feel a rush that is different from their baseline, like everyday apathy that they feel. And I really liked it because towards the end of the book, she was like, in her life, she was really struggling because she's like, well, I want other people to learn about sociopathy. I want other people to not feel so lonely and isolated the way I felt lonely and isolated throughout my life. And she's telling this to her mentor. And then her mentor was like, do you think that people with sociopathy lack empathy? And then Patricia's like, yeah, that's what we're known for. And then her mentor was like, because what you're describing, wanting to help other people and wanting other people with sociopathy to feel less lonely, that to me sounds a whole lot like empathy. And that to her was like a really big turning point to like understand herself. So it was really well written. Honestly, I understand like it was a memoir, but it just felt like I was like watching a movie throughout reading the book. So it was very descriptive. Just like the way it was written the flow was very good. After I read Sociopath, I read The Little Coffee Shop of Kabul by Deborah Rodriguez. The book has like 5 different perspectives, if I'm not mistaken, like the different characters in there. And it's a book about like found family, The book starts off with one main Afghan character. She is pregnant, but her husband has passed away. And so in the Afghan culture, when you are essentially a widow but pregnant, it's like a huge stigma, it's a huge taboo, because the general consensus is that we don't know who the father is, even though you yourself know that like, oh, well, the father of my child is obviously my dead husband, right? Society doesn't think so. And so in order to remove herself from the scrutiny of her village, she leaves. And she ends up, you know, running into like an aid worker, one of the aid workers being in this little coffee shop. She takes her in, takes care of her, but also she knows that my sister is still stuck in the village where my uncle is, and I can't leave her there. A lot of different storylines going on, okay? And I think that was why I ended up giving it 3 stars. I liked it. It's not necessarily that I didn't like it, but there was just a lot going on with 5 different characters, you know? But yeah, it was just too much to follow along. So that's why I gave it a 3 stars. And then the next book that I read, I did this book swap with my friend, so that was very exciting, where I gave him my favorite book and then he gave me his favorite book. So the book was Flowers for Algernon. Essentially, Flowers for Algernon follows the story of Charlie, who is intellectually delinquent and has a very low IQ, but his life's dream is to become intelligent, and that was also his parents' or his mother's dream for him. And so he goes through with this scientific experiment where they have then tested on these rats, one of them being Algernon, where they were able to make these rats very, very intelligent. And so they did that same experiment on him. Charlie was the first human trial, and it was very successful. And he was told to write these like progress reports. So the book is like in the format of these progress reports. And you can see like the way that he writes the reports changes over time. Like the more intelligent he gets, the better he is at writing. And he can't tell anyone about this experiment that was done on him. And so people in his life are kind of like confused at this newfound intelligence that he has. He used to work at a bakery, and then a lot of his coworkers started to not like him, and he essentially internalized a lot of this. But then throughout like the more intelligent he got, he became more and more arrogant in terms of like, how I know how to speak 5 languages, you don't. That was essentially like the way that he viewed other people. And it started to bother and ruin the relationships he had with a lot of people around him. Throughout this time of him gaining this intelligence, he also has a lot of these flashbacks to his past. And he's constantly trying to understand his past because when he was younger, his parents were very emotionally and physically abusive to him. And all he needed was love. And so he really struggles with that. He really battles with that. And he even starts to like reach out to his mother, to his sister, to his father, to try to understand a bit more of his past. And the book basically ends with him writing a study or contributing to the overall study of his intelligence, and writing about like what happened to him and Algernon the mouse. The more intelligent he got, the more arrogant he got and hard on himself he got. He just kind of like lost the joy in life, you know, in pursuit of success or in pursuit of intelligence. Like, what do you lose in the process? So that was kind of like the whole thread in this book, or that's what I picked up. But yeah, so that was Flowers for Algernon. And after Flowers for Algernon, I read The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. And I absolutely devoured this book. The Stationery Shop is about these 2 young teenagers who meet in a stationery shop in Tehran, and they kind of correspond through the stationery shop. Their romance builds from there by leaving these notes inside the book, and then the next person like would come and find the book and read the note and then leave another note for the other person to find. So it was very, very cute. It was very, very teenage romance, and I just ate it up, okay? And Throughout the book, their romance is obviously growing and they want more and they eventually want to get married. But the thing is, the guy's mom does not approve of this relationship. And so he has a really difficult time, you know, he's like put in a really difficult place because he obviously cares about his mother who is sick, but he also really loves this person that he has found. And so he said, okay, let's just elope. And so, you know, it's them trying to elope. But ultimately, this book is set in the future where she is going, she is reliving her past because she never ended up marrying him. She ended up marrying like someone else. So it's like a lot of it's first set in the future or like present day, then goes back in time of them and their romance. And she's kind of like reminiscing over that time. And then it goes back to present day where she wants to kind of close this chapter of her life and not wonder anymore about the what ifs and try to understand what happened back then. Why did they never end up getting married? And it was amazingly written. So much so that I ended up reading her next book, which is called The Lion Women of Tehran. You guys might have heard of it. It came out last year. And The Lion Women of Tehran tells a story about two friends, Homa and Elahe, I think is her name. They call her Ellie. So it's about Ellie and Homa. And they were first friends when Ellie's father passed away and they had to like size down and move to like a poorer neighborhood. They became friends there. They were really close friends, and Ellie would always go to Homa's house and see that, you know, Homa has this beautiful family with a mother and a father and these two siblings, and Ellie's dad is dead. Ellie only has her mother, who is this mean woman to her, and she has no siblings. So she always goes to Homa's house and thinks like, oh wow, this is what like a happy family looks like, and she admired it a lot. Some time passes by and Ellie's mother remarries. They move up in social status, go back to like a more elite or expensive neighborhood, and completely forgets about Homa. All correspondence is like limited to Homa. And over time, you know, she forgets Homa, she moves on with her life, she goes to this new school, when all of a sudden in high school, this new girl comes into the classroom with a scholarship, and lo and behold, it's her childhood best friend, Homa. And she is beyond embarrassed that Homa is acting like she knows her and things like that, because then people will know like she used to be poor, you know? So it's like, let's pretend we don't know each other. But essentially, over time, Homa makes her way back to Ellie anyway. She's just adamant that, you know, we gotta be friends and we gotta rekindle this friendship. So it happens. And then they end up going to the same university. And Homa is this super, you know, political activist, communist at the time in Iran, you know, ready to kind of share information with the rest of the people. And Ellie just wants to get married to her boyfriend. You know, Ellie's like, I don't want to involve myself in politics. The Shah is doing what he's doing and my family's okay with it and I'm okay with it. And, you know, they start to have like conflicting thoughts and feelings about this. Like, why are you so political? And then the other one is like, why are you not political enough? And it's just about their friendship, and then some really big event happens where their friendship essentially explodes, right? And they don't speak to each other for years, and they finally see each other for a little bit in a bazaar around 12 years later. Homa completely avoids Ellie and doesn't really want to talk to Ellie, and then Ellie says, you know, I'm moving to the US. So Ellie moves to the US, and years later Homa reaches out to her, and, you know, things just they kind of find their way back to each other. But what I thought was really, really sad was throughout Ellie's life, no matter what happened, for example, Ellie got married, and then Ellie would have these different celebrations in her life or different successes. She always felt like she was missing Homa, and her husband knew that. Her husband was like, you know, you must be missing her. And similarly, in Homa's life, she felt the same. Whenever some huge thing happened, a huge milestone happened, or like when her husband passed away, the one person she really wanted there was Ellie. So it was just like so heartbreaking to see these two friends who, they're soulmates, they miss each other, and they can feel the love that was lost, and they can feel that big kind of hole in their chest from missing this person. So, you know, I cried a million times reading that book. But yeah, that was yesterday. I finished reading that yesterday, and I was like, you know what? It is time to make another video and, you know, just get started again, you know, because I have a lot of ideas, and I just need to get like the ball rolling. I just need to like post one thing, and then I'll just keep posting, you know, hopefully. But yeah, I have been in a really bad reading slump this year. I think like a lot of things have happened, and I have just ended up binge watching shows to fall asleep instead of reading books, which was what I used to do. I also might be joining a book club, so that's very, very exciting, like a physical in-person book club. So that's super, super exciting, because I've been really meaning to like find a book club and a community of people who read the same books as me. So that's nice. But that's pretty much it for this video. So I think that was like 8 books that I've read so far this year. My goal this year is actually 20, so it's not that high. I'm probably going to be able to make it. I really want to read more, like quality needs to be improved rather than quantity, because last year I read a lot, but I didn't like many of them. So this year I'm just DNFing the ones that I don't like, you know, I'm not forcing myself to continue reading them. And yeah, I have a few exciting books that I want to talk to you guys about this year. But that's pretty much it for now. That's what I've read so far. If you made it to the end of this video, I just want to say thank you for watching, thank you for supporting, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!